We are ready for agenda item 12, discussion of millennial engagement and employment in the city of Rockville. And Mr. Thornhill, thank you very much for joining us tonight. We're looking forward to that discussion. I'll turn it back over to Mary Lou for a minute if there's anything you want to say.
Just the briefest of introductions. We have a real treat here tonight. We do have Matt Thornhill. He's a futurist with the Institute for Tomorrow, and I think most of you up there are familiar with him and have seen him. He's a good friend to Rockville. And then we have recruited 2 Rockville millennials to come and speak to us. And they are actually, first of all, very kind to come and do this with us, but also I think a real credit to our community and to their generation. We have Mary Baltimore. She serves on the city's Cultural Arts Commission, and she, as it turns out, oversees different millennial initiatives in her job as well. So she's going to have some good things to tell us. And then Cliff Beers, he is the Chamber of Commerce Board Chair and is also a businessman here in Rockville. So with that, I will let Matt take it away. And do feel free to interact and ask questions throughout as they come up for you.
Super. Thanks very much, and welcome to you both, and thank you.
So I have prepared some remarks for you, a little presentation on understanding millennials that I'm happy to go through. If you have questions along the way, I'm happy to entertain questions. At the end, I thought we'd have a little panel discussion, if you will, with our millennials, where I've got some questions for them that might help, but again, add additional questions if you'd like. Just as a quick background, as Mary Lou said, my company is, we run a think tank down in Richmond, Virginia called the Institute for Tomorrow. We are futurists, and we get hired by all sorts of organizations, including big corporations all over the country, to come talk to them about understanding generations and generational dynamics in the workplace and in the marketplace. We've done a lot of work in the municipality area, from state government to regional governments to local governments, helping them understand generational issues. So this is not new territory for us. Now you may say, what does a futurist know about the youngest generation, the millennial generation? And part of it is the way that we're structured as a company. We actually are not futurists where we're trying to study when the drones are going to deliver our pizza. We're focused more on what we call the future we already know, the things that are already happening out there. And one of which is we've got a generation that's now large and in charge called the millennial generation. And if you think about it, change isn't coming to Rockville, change is already here. We live in a very different community today than we did even 10 years ago. I mean, you think back to 10 years ago, I was teaching my children 10 years ago, you don't meet a stranger on the internet and you never get in a stranger's car. That's Uber, that's Lyft. You know, we've already changed that much. So if you're still operating the same way you did 10 years ago, you're behind. So we try to help people understand where we are today and what's ahead, looking at some of these trends that are already happening that have nothing to do with technology, like the demographic factors or the cultural trends or what's happening to municipal governments, for example, to try to help plot a path forward. But those trends don't happen on their own. They happen because people make them happen. And a good way to understand people is to use, we call it a generational lens, because we do have different generations at different stages of life. And we have this next generation, this millennial generation, they're the ones that are shaping our society and culture today and going forward. So it's important that we understand them as we think about what's appropriate for the future of Rockville. So let me give you 5 quick things to know when we talk about using a generational lens. The first is that it's just a lens. It's just a tool. It's just an additional way to understand the people in your community, your residents. It's not the be-all and end-all. It's just an additional tool, just like you might look at income or gender or race or some other broad stroke. Generations is a broad stroke. When I talk generations, I'm talking not about you and your kids. I'm talking about a generational cohort. They tend to be about, according to demographers, about 20 years long enough for the oldest one to give birth to the next one. There's always 2 halves to a generation, kind of a front half and a back half. For us boomers, I like to say there's the Bob Dylan boomers and the Bruce Springsteen boomers. And they're different. And, you know, you can self-identify. It's not an exact science. Here in America, we've got 5 different generations over the last 100 years. We have 5 generations today really in the marketplace. The 3 dominant ones are the boomer generation, Generation X, then this millennial generation we're talking about. And the next one coming is called Gen Z for now. That's kind of a placeholder name, but they will be equally large. So we do have large generations kind of interacting in the marketplace. The most important thing to know is that when we're talking about these generational distinctions, it's not about who you are. It's not psychological. It's about what imprinted you. It's sociological. It's external factors that may have shaped your worldview when you were going through your adolescent years, if you will. Whatever events were happening in the world and society and culture shaped you when you were basically between the ages of 10 and 20. And every generation goes through that time and place in history at a different time that shapes generational values, leads to an overarching archetype. So just in the last 100 years or so, we look at the silent generation. They came of age during the Depression of World War II. Us boomers, it was the 50s and 60s. The Gen Xers, it was the late 70s to the mid-90s. The millennials, it was the really mid-90s to the early 2010s. And this Gen Z is being shaped now. In fact, they're going to be shaped more by Trump's presidency and what's next than they were ever shaped by Obama's presidency, for example. And that's just the way it happens in kind of understanding generational dynamics. And as a result, we end up with generations that have different views. Think about your parents' view of money, because they were raised typically in the Depression. It was a penny saved as a penny earned, and you got to save that tinfoil. And they were all shaped by those events when they were kids. We didn't have those experiences. So we got shaped differently, and each generation gets shaped differently as they come of age. There are generational stereotypes out there. I'll give you an example. When I say millennials act so blank. What word comes to mind? What word have you heard attributed to this generation more than probably any other word? You'll see stories about, those millennials, they are so, any guesses? Entitled. How did I know you were going to say that? Because it's a stereotype about this generation. But here's the thing. It's actually not a trait of millennials. It's a trait of people who are about 25 to 30 years old. They act entitled. It's not a generational trait. It's an age trait. Because by 25, you've finished your schooling, you've entered the workforce, and you think, I know it all. I'm ready to take on the world. I thought that way at 25. We all thought that way at 25 or 30. And we didn't know what we didn't know. Think back to Gen Xers. When Gen Xers back in the 90s entered the workforce, and we looked at them and said, man, those guys, they're never going to make it. They weren't entitled. They didn't act that way so much as we said they were all slackers. Remember we called them slackers? And that's not at all accurate for that generation, especially in the workplace. And when us boomers in the 60s and 70s entered the workforce, everyone said, look at those guys. They're a bunch of hippies. And some of us were, but not all of us. So we have to be careful with stereotypes. They may not be accurate. They may have nothing to do with generation. They may have to do with age. I'll give you another one. When I was a kid, when I entered the workforce in the early 80s, I looked at people in their 50s and thought they were a bunch of old fogies, right? And now young people today, they're looking at us, and guess what they think we are? The old fogies. And we look at them as like, those young whippersnappers. It's like, come on. It's generational, it's age, it's all of those things kind of rolled into one. So the last point, and the point you asked me to come talk about is we got to live in the world that the millennials are dominating now. It's their world going forward. They're now basically between the early 20s to mid 30s. There are more of them than there are the rest of us. And each generation, as we look forward, according to the Census Bureau, will have some immigration, we'll have some deaths. They'll be the dominant group. They're already about a third of the workforce today in America. By 2025, they'll be almost half the workforce. Here in the city of Rockville, in your city employment, they're about 28% of the workforce. So you're a little bit behind, but you're actually ahead of most municipalities. Most municipalities and government jobs, it's around 15% millennial. So you guys have done a better job than most in having millennials as part of your workforce. But you're already behind, and you got to just kind of struggle to keep up because, again, there's more of them than anyone else. As I said, they're shaping our society and culture. So what do we need to do? What do we need to do to understand them? So let me share some insights about how they got to be how they are, how they're wired. And part of it is the events. They came of age again in the late 90s through the early 2000s to early 2010s. What kinds of events affected them? All of these things affected them. They came of age in a pretty rough time in our history. But if anything, they got inoculated a little bit. We end up with some set of generational values that are unique to this generation and different from other generations. I'm going to talk about a couple of them as we go forward. But they got inoculated from a lot of these things for two reasons: how they were raised and how they're wired. Now, part of it is how they were raised. They were raised primarily by us boomers who said, you know what, we're going to get this parenting thing right. No one had ever raised children correctly before, so we were going to get it right. And we said, we're going to read books like What to Expect When You're Expecting or How to Raise a Toddler. So we ended up cultivating this precious little DNA that we were making because us self-centered boomers wanted to make sure our babies were special. In fact, we told them probably about 1 million times that they were special as we raised them. And I did it to my kids. But I have to think back to when I was a child and my parents looked at me and there were 4 of us in the family, and my parents would look at us and go, "What, you think you're special?" They were putting me in my place, and my place was not on a pedestal. We did the opposite. Us boomers raised these folks and put them on a pedestal. Time magazine said they're the me generation. And part of it is, again, back in the 90s, we got video cameras and we started filming them and putting them on our TV. And now they don't need the video camera. They got their own. I'm going to put myself on TV. The selfies. So they have a very look at me. So it's now manifested itself in the workplace. They show up, yes, those trophies they got for just showing up, they all think they're all-stars for showing up. So we find as managers and leaders in organizations to deal with a generation that just isn't ready to perform and be rated on performance, they think if they just show up, they're doing fine. So that's the first thing. The second thing is how they're wired. They are the digital natives. They had the technology in their hands at a very early age, and it's wired them together. Maybe the best way is to share a story. My business partner, John, had got a daughter when she was a senior in high school. One night he said, "Look, tomorrow morning, let's go fishing. We can skip school in the morning. It's just spring of your senior year. It'll be all right." So they went down to the James River down in Richmond where we live. The shad were running. They immediately caught a fish. She goes, "Dad, take a picture of me kissing this fish." So she hands him the phone. He takes a picture, hands the phone back. And he turns around and catches 92 fish over the course of the next hour and a half. Catching and releasing, just having a great time. And he kept going, "Fish number 10. And he's looking over, and Becca is sitting there doing on her phone. She never puts her line back in. So they're driving to school later, and he goes, "Becca, how come you stopped fishing?" "What do you mean, Dad?" "Well, I caught 92 fish, and you never put your your line back in." She goes, "Dad, you don't get it. I was fishing with 92 of my friends. I woke up half of Richmond sending that picture to them this morning." So he goes, "Okay, whatever." Off they go to school. That night she comes home and he goes, "Give me your demerit slip for being late." She goes, "Dad, you really don't get it. I got to school and this picture was up in every school classroom I went into. The teachers were high-fiving me. The principal thought it was so cool I'd gone fishing with my dad." And John, my business partner, puts on his researcher hat and he goes, I think I get it. We're out there living the experience, and we're going to tell the story about it later, because that's how we're wired. Because they have the technology in their hands at the time, it's not about living the experience, it's about sharing it while you're having it. That's why they take pictures of their dinner and post it up on Instagram while they're eating it. It doesn't count if you can't share it. This collective, these experiences have to be shared. This collective has to weigh in on everything. How many likes did you get? It's almost as if the wisdom of the crowd is more important. And in fact, if you think about it, wait a second, all of their decisions are based on what the crowd says, not what an expert says. Nobody reads the review in the Washington Post of a restaurant anymore because they just go to Yelp and see what does the crowd say about the restaurant. Because the crowd dominates. Trust is not in the individual expert. It's not in the mayor's office. It's what does the community think? Let's crowdsource it. Let's get everyone. The wisdom of the crowd is better than the thoughts of the few. So that's an example of how they're wired that's different than how we're wired. We would expect the expert. We would look to the authority. Our parents were even more authority-driven. The generals got us out of World War II. The doctor is the authority figure. We challenge that. But they don't even trust that. The crowd is the authority. What does the crowd say? So as you manage the city, as you manage the government, if you don't engage them in the decisions you're making, they pay no attention to it. It's not valid. It's not to be trusted. The crowd is the trust source. So it's a different dynamic that we have to deal in now as we're trying to engage them. This collective self is the dominant mindset that we see. So this generation is an interesting thing. We said, wait a second, they all thought they're special, yet they're all talking about the collective now. How did that doesn't quite add up? And we went back and thought about it and said, well, okay, maybe what we have to think about is that the specialness is not comparative. It's not that I'm better than you. It's an absolute special. I'm special. You're special. You're special. You're special. Everybody's special. In a world where everybody's special, guess what? No one's better than anybody else. We're all equal. We all have an equal say. The crowd does rule. So it does kind of add up. So we end up with a generation that's not the me generation. It's the opposite. It's the we generation, which is good news for Rockville and good news for communities across the country. Because this generation is already, as I said, shaping our society. They tell us in surveys they want to live in urban areas. And what they mean by that is they want to live someplace where they can live, work, play, and have access to resources all within about a 15-minute travel time. It can be on foot, by bike, metro, car, but they want to live someplace where they're not kind of on 270 or on 495. They tell us that they are hyper-connected. They invented all of these different ways to stay connected, and we followed them. We're all using these tools to stay connected. They are hyper-collaborative. Part of it is from middle school on, we made them do school projects. You don't earn the grade, the group earns the grade. Doesn't matter if you don't carry your weight, the group decides, and the group earns the grade. So it's that collaboration thing. They're wired to compromise as a result, which is good news. And in fact, now it's made its way into the economy. I don't have to own stuff, I'll just share it. I'll borrow it from a friend. So it's a different mindset, a different generation. It's no wonder they're more likely to trust the federal government than older generations. They're much more likely to want more or bigger government than older generations. We kind of ask, almost tongue-in-cheek, have we raised a generation of socialists? I don't know yet from a political standpoint, but I do know this. We've raised a generation all about community. All about community. And community can be the global community, but it can also be local. It can be Rockville. It can be a school in their community or a neighborhood in their community that they want to support because community matters to them. It's about the crowd, not the individual. So what does that mean? Well, the good news is they're very ambitious. They think that they can solve all the problems in the world. Part of that could be youthful exuberance. Maybe they'll mellow out over time, but right now they're ready to go. So how do we activate them? How do we engage them? So let's talk about that. How do we develop some strategies to engage them, not just to come live here, but to make a difference here, to participate and make a difference, either in the government or in the community? So a couple of ideas, and then we'll do some Q&A. First is, why don't we tap into their ambition and their love for community? How do we kind of access that? A couple of ideas around that. You know, the culture is shifting. It is shifting away from that boomer me mentality to this millennial we mentality. That's good news. What it means is we've got a generation that's about collaboration and compromise. I can't wait till they get elected to Congress. You know, it may be the 2030s before we get them there, but once we get them there, they're wired to compromise and collaborate. They're not going to go off in their corners and just point fingers at each other and say, I'm not even going to meet with you. They're just not, that's not how they operate. They're eager to contribute now and make a difference. They think that everything should be about fairness and equity, equality, and they think anything's possible if we work together. Don't just assign it to one person. Get a group together to solve a problem, especially a big problem, because they want to. They're wired that way. Communities are tapping into that. Up in Maine, the Maine Municipal League has put together a program to get people to stay in Maine. Maine is suffering from demographic shift. It's growing older. They can't keep their young people. So they developed a series of videos to say, here's what hometown careers look like. They've got 6 different videos. I'm going to show you clips from one of them that they're doing to say, hey, to young people, hey, think about a career in our municipality here in Maine. So let me show you this little clip.
After living in Australia for about 8 years, I really missed home and wanted to be back in Maine with my family.
A lot of people think you have to leave Maine to secure a good paying job. I still have a lot of friends that graduated at the same time and before me, and they don't have their health insurance, they don't have their retirement.
Maine towns and cities are hiring a new generation to fill vital jobs, from clerks and managers to law enforcement and EMTs. Hear why a Maine hometown career may be right for you.
It's a really rewarding field, and there's a lot of growth and development. You can do anything really once you start here.
I was considering moving out west after college, but staying home is one of the best decisions that I ever made.
You get great benefits, good health care packages, and you get a lot of things that private sector jobs just can't offer.
There's nothing you can do better than working in municipal government because you're really the heart of the community. I wanted a job, something that was fun, something that was exciting, something that keeps me motivated to come to work each day. I have literally the best job in the world.
I would just say to anyone, this is a really viable career and you should look into it.
It's the best feeling in the world to know that you're making a difference within your state.
I would say to any young Mainers who are considering a career in local government in Maine that you have a real opportunity to make a positive impact on communities here, that you're going to have a job where your quality of life is second to none, and that you're making a real investment in your future.
Contact towns and cities near you about career openings right now, or check out job descriptions and listings at mainehometowncareers.org.
The pay and the benefits are awesome.
I'm really excited about having a position at the age of 25 where I can help shape this community moving forward.
So you can hear in what they talked about, it's some of the themes I'm talking about. They want to make a difference. They want to be engaged in their community. And they didn't even know that these jobs existed. They had no knowledge at all. So an intentional effort to kind of share what are the jobs in municipal government? What could I do? So it's a good strategy that they've done. Now, let me give you another strategy. Down in Atlanta, one of the things they did was they wanted to attract millennials to get engaged in decision making, but they couldn't get them to run for office. Most of them felt like they were too young or too inexperienced. So they said, well, we'll develop an advisory panel that you have to be vetted and try out for. They had over 450 applications. They picked 135 members, a huge group, and said, you guys are now our Millennial Advisory Committee. And then they split them into subgroups and gave them assignments. Again, they had no power, but they were told to come together and see if you could solve some problems or deal with some issues. And they gave them assignments across 4 different huge issues, and they came up with 8 different teams and great things that, again, kind of fit into what they're interested in. They wanted a unified regional transit system because they're interested in 15-minute communities. Not everybody wants to live downtown, but wherever they live, they want to have access to everything within 15 minutes away. World-class education for all. Who doesn't want that? Unite the region with a shared vision and story. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a minute. And they wanted to champion smart regional cooperation. Let's stop pointing fingers at each other and let's be smart about how we work together. County, city, various cities down in Atlanta. And it's been a huge success for them. And those millennials that they got engaged, they started this program a couple of years ago, they've already now identified some, and some have started running for office and are getting engaged. Some have been hired by the city in various departments and aspects. So it's working for them. Another effort is about telling your story and making sure people understand it. We worked with the town of Rockbridge, the county of Rockbridge, and the town of Lexington down in Virginia. That's where the Washington and Lee University is, Virginia Military Institute. And they were finding that their graduates come, they go to school, they graduate, and they leave. And they're like, well, how do we get them to come back? And they can go off to Washington or New York or something. How do we get them to come back and start small businesses here? How do we get some of the students to stay here and be engaged? So we went and found people who had done that, who had come back and decided that they loved it and wanted to live in a small town like in the Shenandoah Valley, like Lexington. So we put together a whole promotional website to explain it about it, and then we had them make videos. And here's an example of a video of a young man who decided to renovate an old venue, I guess.
Limestone had a very bad reputation and it had a lot to get over. My involvement started in 2013 when Limestone had been dead for about a year and a half, and the landowner called me and had heard about my involvement with the music festival I used to run. And we met, and he said, what do you think about trying to put on a couple shows here? I hadn't been there since it shut down, been here since it shut down, but I knew it needed a lot of work. And after quite a bit of thought, I decided to give it a whirl and see what I could do. We were definitely the underdogs since everybody believed it couldn't be done. And I built a new board, got a lot of young people involved, a lot of alums and other Rockbridge County residents, and we've really stepped up to the plate. Everything kind of came down to that first show when all the rumors of Limekiln starting back up and people hearing all the work that we had been doing kind of all came to fruition when everybody came for the opening show. But we did get a sponsor for that show. We had seasoned sponsors, and the first show we sold 600 tickets. It was beautiful weather. The band was phenomenal, and kind of from that point forward, it's just been a success story. What makes Rockbridge unique is its size. Doing business in Rockbridge County, given its size, allows you to make much more meaningful connections with other people that do business, and much more intimate connections. Starting this business in particular, the venue has been very easy in the sense that I've been able to meet a lot of different people face to face and have personable connections. For example, the building inspector, the local ABC officer, the landowner, the county board of supervisors, and the government. I think probably over the past 15 years or so, things have shifted, and there's more opportunity now. The young population is still small here, which helps us have kind of more of a sense of pride, because the people that were running things are now at retirement age. And there's a lot of opportunity for people right out of college to come here, or people that have a few years of work experience after college and have gotten some experience in a specific field to come back here and be more entrepreneurial.
So that really does, again, demonstrate and provides proof points for young people about the opportunities that exist. You may think, well, they're not interested in small towns, but when he sets it up that way, in a small town, you know the people. You can get things done. You can make decisions. It's a lot more manageable. So putting together and telling your story in a way that is compelling and engaging the young people in telling of the story is the best way to get them engaged. Second thing you can do is invest in placemaking. And placemaking is basically creating infrastructure, basically venues and trails and places to go, and then creating events, things to do. Like you've got things to do downtown now, I can go ice skating, and in the summer I can go down with my family and have music and evening events. So you're already doing those kinds of things. Another example down in Virginia, down in Shenandoah Valley, is Roanoke, which is about a city of about 70,000 people. They looked and said, what can we do in terms of placemaking to do it in terms of economic development, to draw people to our region? And they looked at their region, they're nestled right in the middle of the Shenandoah Valley, and said, you know what? We've got something that nobody else has. We've got better outdoors than anybody else. Now I hear that and go, who are you kidding? Everybody's got great outdoors. Have you been outdoors? It's called outdoors. It's better than the inside. So I'm not sure you got a leverageable position there. They go, no, let's build everything around outdoors. Let's create venues. Let's talk about what you can do outside in Roanoke. Let's create venues and trails. Let's try to attract tour operators and things so you can do rafting and hiking and all sorts of activities. They invented the Blue Ridge Mountain Marathon. And said, let's put on an event. Running a marathon, most people want to do on flat ground. They said, no, let's put it up in the mountains and make it the hilliest marathon in America. And guess what? It attracted crazy people from all over the country who wanted to come run up and down those hills. And they found that the people that came to run up and down the hills included doctors and accountants and dentists who wanted to then relocate to Roanoke so they could live this outdoor lifestyle that they were promoting and talking about. They got enough of those people there that they then were able to attract companies that are in the outdoor space. They landed backcountry.com, which is a large online seller of outdoor equipment. They were looking for an East Coast location. They looked at Asheville. They ended up putting it in Roanoke because of Roanoke Outdoors. Their economic development manager says, you've got to create a sense of place that's authentic and then monetize it and use it to attract like-minded people and companies. For a community our size, jobs follow people. You need the people there or the jobs won't come. Amazon's coming to Northern Virginia because the millennials are here in Northern Virginia. It's going to New York for the same reason. It's not going to go to a community that doesn't already have them. So you got to make your community attractive for this generation. So part of what you have to realize is, what is your story? You know, I went and took a tour and walked around downtown and said, wow, this looks great, but what's the story? What is the story of Rockville? It's got a great name. Is it all about rock and roll? I don't know. But part of what you have to do is really figure out your story. Is it the fact that you're this 15-minute livable community and you've got the metro and all of those things? That could be it. But how do you differentiate yourself from the other stops on the metro lines? What makes Rockville unique? Part of what people want is to have a nice place that's got a brand or an identity. It needs to be a compelling, single-minded story. It needs to be well articulated and understood by everybody. It needs to be shareable. You know, Austin, Texas talks about Austin being weird. Portland, Oregon does the same thing. Visit Annapolis is telling their story online. Rockville is telling its story online and social media. You have to cultivate and be intentional about telling your story, figuring out what your story is, and then telling it. And we've worked with organizations to help them do it because people share the story. Once they know it, they share it. You know, think about Disney. We all have experienced the wonders of the world of Disney, but Disney is very intentional about making sure that their employees and associates share the story outwardly. So their social media strategy isn't just that corporate Disney says this about it. They go and train their employees. Here's how to talk about Disney in your social media feeds. That's pretty interesting. There's a lot of municipal government folks who probably have social media feeds. How are they talking about Rockville? Do you have a single-minded story that they're telling? We've worked again with organizations. We worked with the city of Norfolk to figure out their story. And it wasn't just the municipal government hired us, but then we ended up engaging 40 different organizations in Norfolk who have the word Norfolk in their name. Or Norfolk is their response, from the zoo to the museums to the people that put on events. And we said, you're all talking about Norfolk, but you're all using different words. You're all singing the same song, but you have different notes. How do we come together? And we crowdsourced it in a very millennial-like way. We surveyed them and we asked them, what is Norfolk's story? Let's figure out what we're all saying and see if there's a way we can say it together, kind of in one way. And so we've created literally these materials that we give to everybody in Norfolk that's promoting Norfolk to say, here's how to tell the story. And collectively, we'll rise the story about Norfolk. It's not just up to the city to do it. It's everybody's got a vested interest. Same thing applies here in Rockville. Figure out your story and tell your story. The third thing specific to millennials is they're all about food and startups because food is community. I don't know what your policy is about food trucks. If you don't allow them, you need to allow them because that's a way to get community. Meals is community time for millennials. And another thing is it's just a great way to kind of build up the reputation of the town, of the city. I see that you guys have got First Watch here. I'm very excited we now have First Watch in Richmond. We're kind of a late bloomer, I guess, on the First Watch. It's a fabulous restaurant, fabulous concept. So those kinds of things make a difference in a community. Also, what makes a difference is people are moving to where they can make a difference, where they feel like they can be engaged. A lot of millennials want to start jobs. They want to start businesses that are social entrepreneur type businesses. There are incubators everywhere. I don't know if there's incubators here in Rockville. You should encourage development of them. You should make sure they've got the tools that they need to be successful. And you might want to try to find ways to create opportunities for them to interact with older generations to share ideas. I like to say that Ben and Jerry's, which started in Vermont when they were 27, they had older people helping them. They weren't just these mastermind kids who figured it out. They had mentors. So who are the mentors in Rockville that could be helping young people today who want to start businesses? Young people like Cliff, who's got a family business, who are his mentors? So to end up, what are some things you can do to engage millennials? I talked about the kind of shadow government approach that Atlanta has taken with the advisory committees. You really just need to focus on purpose. They want to make a difference. And working in local government is a great way for people to make a difference. You know, purpose is not what you do or how you do it or who you are, it's why. And government is here to serve the public. It's here to serve the citizens. So it's not hard to talk about your why. It's important for every generation to talk about. People tell us in surveys that they want to work someplace where they can make a difference. It's part of a bigger trend where we've become a much more open society. You know, things that used to be closed are now open, from office design. Things that you couldn't find, you kept private, is now very public on the internet. There's an expectation that everyone's going to share information. And as individuals have moved down this path to being very public, organizations have followed. So what is the purpose of Rockville's government? Are you talking about it in your promotional materials? Are you talking about it as you try to recruit and hire people? Here's what the difference you can make in our community, because you need to talk about purpose. They're wired to hear purpose. Down in Richmond, the reason you have to talk about purpose is this. Governments and nonprofits have had a corner on the purpose business, if you will, forever, for decades, because you're in to serve others. Goodwill says we're in the business of changing lives down in my neck of the woods. But if I want a pair of shoes, do I go buy it at Goodwill and change lives? Or do I go online to Tom's Shoes, where I can buy, it says we're in business to help change lives. I can buy a pair of shoes and change somebody's life in Africa or some third world country. Well, that's equally appealing to me. So the point is, you got competition on the purpose front. I can go work for you and make a difference, or I can go work for Lockheed Martin and make a difference. Really? Yeah, because they want to talk about their purpose and the difference that they're making. So purpose is really key. And you think about, there's data out there. Millennials say, if I can work someplace where there's special meaning, I'm going to stay. So not only do you have to talk to them about purpose, you got to remind them of the purpose every day. You know, what is the purpose? Have you articulated? Is it well understood? Is it shared? You know, if you think about the jobs like police or teacher, all of those things that you do in municipal government, those are callings, not a career. It's a calling to serve the public. What you're doing is serving the public. You've been called to it. Other people are at home tonight doing their own thing, and you're here. So clearly there's a passion, but are you talking about it when you talk about the jobs? Because that's how you attract millennials to it. Because they're not thinking about it that way. So create a workplace culture that works for all generations by focusing on your purpose, and remind people frequently that's a calling. You know, to engage millennials, I think you talk about community, 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 and you remind them daily about the difference that they're making. And I want to end with just a quick little story of a community that faced a big problem, a huge problem, in fact, and kind of the formula that they followed to be successful to get out of it. Rockville doesn't face any kind of problem like this, but let me just share this story as an illustration. It's a story about this little town in Tennessee called Erwin, Tennessee. Population of 6. You ever heard of Erwin, Tennessee? It's nestled in the mountains near Virginia and Kentucky and in that eastern end of Tennessee. Beautiful little community. But they had a problem in this little community, and the problem was, the mayor had to use millennials to fix the problem. Doris Hensley is the mayor. And the problem is literally the kind of elephant in the room problem. And when I mean literally, I actually mean literally. If you search on Google Images, Erwin, Tennessee, a couple of years ago, if you search Erwin, Tennessee and search Google Images, what you would find would be the story of an elephant that was killed in Erwin, Tennessee 100 years ago. It was an elephant that had trampled somebody in a nearby town. The circus came to Erwin. The judge passed the judgment, and they hung the elephant. Stories about it, they killed this elephant. It's a shameful story. But you search Erwin, Tennessee, and you hear about the elephant. And they got these millennials together and said, how do we solve it? And the millennials said, let's just deal with it head on. Let's embrace the elephant and turn it into an asset, not a problem. And let's change the conversation around the elephant. So they created the Erwin Elephant Revival, put on a series of events like a trunk show, a glow parade. The elephant's name was Mary. They put on a Magic Downtown Festival. They did all sorts of things and started this whole, and there happens to be an elephant sanctuary in nearby Tennessee where circus elephants and zoo elephants go for retirement. And they said, let's raise money for this sanctuary and let's Irwin be known for that support of elephants to make the other story kind of get off the homepage of Google. Let's make it go away. They hired a company in Norway to make these porcelain elephants. They then gave people the opportunity to paint them and decorate them, and then they put them up all over the town. So talk about having a story now. Now they have a story about the Irwin elephants, and it's changed their town. They've got new businesses have started up on Main Street where these elephants are. Some of the people, the millennials who were engaged in the project, are now, one of them's on city council, another one is involved in the county government. So it's worked. By engaging the millennials, they just put together a task force. Doris put together a task force and said, help us figure out how to solve this problem. Now, you guys don't have that kind of problem, but the strategy, and here's a picture, of, again, on social media where a lady took her kids to all of the different elephants and took pictures of it. And 5 years ago, you would have never done that. You couldn't have, and they were ashamed of anything related to elephants. They changed the whole conversation by heading it on. So the model they followed was to engage, in this case, it was both boomers and millennials, but to engage people in the community, specifically millennials, to come together. They invested in some events and some placemaking things, and they focused on their story. They changed their story, and it created a winning municipality for them. So create a future for Rockville that no elephant will ever forget is the opportunity you have in front of you as you think about going forward. So with that, that's the end of my prepared remarks, and I want to stop talking and turn it over and let my millennials here kind of participate and answer any questions you have. I've got a couple of questions for them, but I want to stop first and see if you have questions specific that you'd like to ask of my friends, my new friends.
Thank you very much. And
Oops, I didn't turn that on. Thank you very much, Matt, and here. That was quite a good presentation. All right, anybody have anything they'd like to ask first, or should we kick it off? All right, we're going to kick it off.
Okay.
Mary, Cliff, I don't know how you guys have this planned.
Well, I have a couple of questions for them, so why don't y'all stand up? So I explained that this generation is kind of the we generation. Have you experienced that in your life, as your young adult life, really? Is it more about kind of the we doing things together and making decisions, or is it me, 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 me? And I know you're talking for only 80 million people, so be careful.
I love that we said that millennials believe in the wisdom of the crowd and not the thoughts of a few, yet here we are, two people representing 70 million. So,
so noted.
Yeah, definitely, you know, I mean, I think you said it all. It's all about sharing experiences and having experiences to share.
Yeah.
I think saying a statement of we is pretty accurate. We do tend to listen to everything. We research what other people say. A lot of people think, oh, you know, this is just what I want to do. This is just, you know, what would satisfy me and our generation. No, while we may be on our phone or in our Snapchat or Instagram, we're still listening to a very large community. And so with anything that we make a decision on, or if it's to make a difference somewhere, it really is what is the best for them. Not as what the best is for me and my background, or what is the best, you know, for how we grew up or what we've experienced. How is it the best for everybody that's involved?
And that feels different than when we came of age. I'll give you another example. I'm just curious from your perspective. I've had it with my own kids. Have you ever lent money to somebody, one of your friends, in a situation where they just were short and you gave them the money and you had no expectation of ever getting it back and didn't care if you ever got it back?
Yep.
I'm still waiting for a lot of money back, actually. Yeah, I say that a little tongue-in-cheek. I think, yeah, the answer is definitely yes. And a lot of times friends say, yeah, I'll pay you back, but they never do, which is why I keep track of all of them in a diary, and like I said, I'm waiting for them to pay me back.
Are you as draconian as he is?
No, you know, for my friends and I, we all know that we're going to make it. So if anybody needs anything, it's not even, you don't have to say, oh, are you going to pay me back? We know that when each other has it, we're going to be there to support each other.
Right. It's that community thing. And again, when I was a young man, if I had to lend $20 to somebody, it came with strings attached, you know? I needed it back. And there's just less of that. They don't have the same mindset about money. Money is not the driver of everything for them. It's experiences, and it's just different. Do you guys, here's a question, you kind of can think about your friend group, your larger friend group. Do you have friends who you went to school with or whomever who have decided, I want to go live X in some place without having a job lined up? They just decided that's where they wanted to go live, and they'd figure out the whole job thing once they got there?
Maybe not quite to that degree, but yes, I've had friends who say, I'm gonna move to San Francisco, and I'll find a job in San Francisco, but that's where I'm gonna move. And you can do that online from Maryland.
Right.
But maybe not quite to the extent of, I'm just gonna go out to San Francisco and find my way and hitchhike my way to an employer.
So I've actually done the complete opposite, and so have my friends. Just had a friend that moved to Hawaii, no job, no plan, and finally found a job. I've myself went to live overseas with no money and no job, just on the hinge of an internship that was part of public service, and created my own way to live there for a whole semester. So there's plenty. Even somebody is planning next month to actually move out of the country to Australia. So I have plenty of friends that you just hop and go, and you figure it out when you're there.
And again, we've heard that all through a lot of this generation. It's not so much about I've got to go have a career, and it doesn't matter that, okay, I want to work in advertising. Well, that means I have to go to New York and work on Madison Avenue. They go, I don't want to live in New York. So I'm going to pick the place I want to go live, and I'll figure out what I do once I get there, which means that placemaking is really important, because they're going to pick where they live based on what the attributes are, what the emotional benefits are of living in that place. Does that feel like where I can make my way? And they want to go there, and then they'll figure out the job thing. Versus, I'm an actress, I'm going to go to New York or LA, and I'll end up being a waitress. Your friend who went to Hawaii, did they go to because they wanted to be a professional surfboard person? Did they? So they just wanted to live in Hawaii, and they'll figure it out when they get there. So that's just a different mindset that we're seeing. That's kind of interesting and just makes us think about it.
I also think that though, it's because millennials are keen, as you said, to entrepreneurship. So I know wherever I go, if I don't find a job, I'll create the job.
Right.
And so I can take my work with me anywhere. And I tend to pick places that would allow me that flexibility, and so do my friends. Some of my friends have moved even to just wild places where there's nothing there. They have found satisfaction and success just by implementing their own businesses.
So let me ask this. What do you think local governments should do to try to engage millennials, not just necessarily come work there, but to be participants in the civic experience that is Rockville? What are some things that you might say? I mean, you're already engaged by being on the chamber.
Yeah, and the chamber actually has a young professionals group, and we've had this kind of come up in our meetings before, and I think that one of the reasons there's only two of us here is because it's hard to get millennials to come to a city council meeting. And one person in our group made the comment that if you want to see what millennials' opinions are, they're out there. Go online, you can see it in social media. I mean, you just gotta know where to look for it, and that's probably more valuable than having a handful come, give their opinion for everyone in a meeting like this.
Let me put a different spin on something. if you want to get engaged with the community, sometimes you have to initiate the engagement. So, you know, our representatives going to these seniors in these high schools and saying, hey, this is what I do. Would you like to shadow me? Or, hey, you know, these are opportunities that you can contribute to the government. Or you're going to Montgomery College and saying, hey, we're looking for fresh new ideas. And when you're having these talks, say, if you ever have any questions and you don't feel comfortable coming or you can't come because, you know, you're a student or you have to work, this is my social media. You can send me questions, you can ask me questions and engage that way. Everybody has to meet at a certain point. And right now you're dealing in an environment where you have generations, and I'm not just going to narrow it down to millennials, because you have Generation Z that are interns now.
Right.
You have a generation that may not trust the government. So why would they come to you? Because they're out there trying to create their own. Sometimes you have to meet them in their own playing field, and you have to be prepared for that engagement.
And that reminds me of something that we hear in corporate America, and we hear it from parents. It's like, get your nose out of your phone. All they have is their nose is in their phone all that time. They're always doing this in their phone. And you know why they do that? Because they can. It's not a generational thing. It's a technology thing. If we had this when we were teenagers or young adults, guess what we'd be doing? Our heads would be down in the phone. In fact, we're doing it today. You go into any coffee shop and you'll see people my age with their heads down in the phone. So it's the tool set that's changed. So what Mary's saying is that the tool set has changed in how you engage them. You don't have an open meeting and hope they show up at the local library or the school. You've got to find a way to get to them using the tool set, which has changed. So I think that's an important point. So I don't really have, is there anything else you can think of? Representing 80 million? Come on. If you had a chance to talk to city council and the mayor about millennials in Rockville, what would you want to tell them?
I would think, you know, one of the things that I have expressed before, one, you have to define yourself. What city are you going to be?
Right.
Are you going to be a family-centric community? Are you going to be a community for millennials? If you're going to be both, how are you going to balance that? What economic development studies need to happen in order for that to occur? When you're trying to engage any type of audience, whether it's millennials or boomers or anybody, you have different communication strategies. You have different marketing methods. You have different styles, different representatives that have to go out. Because one of the first things that, you know, you'll notice about these up and coming generations is we're not afraid to ask questions. And we will put you on the spot. Other generations, you know, will try to more diplomatic approach, right? You know, you're more experienced, you have more wisdom, there's different ways to ask it, you know? But when if you're in that younger generation and you're looking at this person, I expect you to represent me. I expect you to be able to meet me on my level. And sometimes you have to come down to mentor level and say, hey, I understand you, but can you meet me here? I'm going to invite you to this event. Do you mind, you know, I came out to your event, I've reached out to you. Do you mind coming here and talking to us? So that way it can be televised. That way your voice can be heard. It's always a two-way street. It's just somebody has to be the first person to move. Yeah. Different audiences. You can say generations as well, but every target audience is different. And once you really strategize on how to meet that audience, that's when you gain momentum.
So I want to go back to something you said a minute ago, Mary, about what kind of a city do we want to be? And I'm staring at the screen in front of me, and I'm wondering if you look up there at the screen on the left, does that bring in you guys? Does that make you interested in being part of the city? When you see that logo, does that like encourage you to get involved?
Mm-mm.
Yeah, I wondered.
Nope.
Cliff, you?
And I'll just piggyback on Mary's comment. If I were advising the city, given the demographic shifts that are taking place, and you guys have seen my pyramid is now a pillar type thing, you can't be for one generation over another.
That's right.
You got to be a great place for people of all ages.
That's right.
And what you need to do is to figure out, it's not that you have to necessarily look at, you may have some unique physical attributes of Rockville that you can leverage that nobody else has. I don't know that you do, but like Roanoke and it's outdoors. But instead you have to say, okay, maybe we can differentiate in that we have a certain attitude or certain personality or certain whatever. Harley Davidson motorcycles, they don't care how old you are, what color you are, what gender you are. They just want rebels who want the freedom of the road. If you're a rebel, this is your bike. You don't buy a Honda, you buy a Harley. So they found that positioning to talk about that goes across everybody. That's what Rockville needs, is that kind of positioning, that story that's true and authentic about Rockville, but touches every generation and every segment.
Other questions or comments? Councilmember Shale.
Okay, so two people representing 70 or 80 million people. What are the attitudes on getting married and having kids and the age at what you do that?
Well,
Okay, I'm throwing a flag, a penalty flag, not a fair.
Well, no,
I'm
because
32, married with a 2-year-old.
okay.
If that answers anything. I mean, I think that I've got tons of friends who are not married yet and that are older than me. And I think that by and large, compared to previous generations, we're probably having less kids.
And later, and
later.
census data has got that. They're putting off having kids. And typically around age 28, 29, 30, not 24. So it's changed pretty dramatically in the last 30 years.
Yeah, well, the reason I asked it, and I pretty much knew the answer, but it was this whole thing of I'm going to choose to live in Hawaii and I'll figure it out is a lot easier when you're single than if you have a family and have to support kids.
Yes.
So that's why I mentioned it. That's
I would say we're all single. None of us wants kids, and none of us has thought about marriage. So,
Councilmember Feinberg.
Who's going to pay our Social Security? You know, when I was listening to you, I am definitely the baby boomer generation. And when you spoke, and I really enjoyed it, both its humor and its wisdom therein. You know, you talked about this is attractive. This group of millennials wants to feel a purpose, a vision, a commitment. And then I think I'm going to speak for me. Don't want to impose on my colleagues here, but we of the baby boomer generation, there were many of us who felt exactly the same way. The call to action from John F. Kennedy,
Sure.
I think, inspired a generation of us to go into public service. Not everyone, but many people. Same kind of, we want that commitment. We want to feel we're making a difference. And I can remember that same rebel feeling of many people saying, I'm going to go to San Francisco and I'm just going to figure it out then, or I'm going to join a commune and figure it out then. So part of what you're saying, I struggle with a little bit. Where I'm really in sync with you is when you talk about these transformative events. You know, I think to myself as a teenager, I never forget that it was Martin Luther King's being killed, John F. Kennedy's being killed. Those were transformative things as a young child.
Definitely.
And never forgot that. My parents' generation, World War II, Pearl Harbor, that type, and the Depression. And for these folks, I have a millennial, okay? You know, I think of the Challenger. He remembers as a little kid hearing about the Challenger, but he remembers more importantly 911.
Sure.
That was the defining moment. I don't know for you two, but for him, that was so defining. But I wonder now, how can we do things as a city, kind of bringing it back to us? And I'm thinking about what can we do for recruitment and retention on the city level, making city employment more competitive and attractive within our region, let's say, and even to attract people here. And then how else, I know we want to meet you halfway, more than halfway I'll meet you. But I sometimes feel from millennials, when they want to engage, They want to do a spot activity. It's not a long-term commitment. That was something I didn't see here, but if I'm off base on that, tell me, because I get the feeling even for like, say, volunteerism, don't require a long task from a millennial. Give them a specific thing, like a meetup almost, and that is more attractive to your generation. So if you can speak on behalf of the 70 million on that, I'd love it.
I think one of the byproducts of the internet is that millennials are pulled in 1,000 different directions at once. So I think that might be a reasoning for that. Maybe afraid of committing an extended period of time when they've got so many other things that they also want to commit to. And I just want to echo one thing, because you talked about having similar feelings and thoughts when for the other generations. Another thing that came up in our young professionals group is that we kind of compared it to a movie where the aliens come to Earth. And before it turns into all-out war, the people on Earth, their leaders are saying, you know what, we want to engage with these aliens, and we want to live amongst them and learn about them. And I feel like that's sometimes how older generations talk about millennials, when in fact there's probably more similarities in between the generations than there are differences. So I think keeping that in mind can kind of help guide you in some decisions too.
I kind of want to split your question up into twofold and then throw in like this outside concept. So think about the different generations as you move forward in life, right? You experience things faster, quicker than before. And so when we come out into the world, I'm gonna throw out this side thing called education, right? People, you kind of touched on this. People think that, millennials come out to the job force, entitled and things like that. But I want you to think about this in education. We were just talking about study abroads earlier. You have more young adults going out, living in other countries, starting businesses in other countries, expanding businesses into different countries or back into the U.S. I mean, I'm not afraid to say my age. I'm 27. I've done all that before I even graduated college, handling $32 million contracts or more. And so when I come out to the workforce, what do I expect to work on? Something that matches that experience, something that gives me that drive. So there's a couple things that happens when you're able to, not everybody has that, right? But the people who take initiative to have those type of opportunities. When you come out into the world, whether city government or, the private sector, what you end up doing is, I know what I want. So then when you try something, you don't get it. Okay, I'm going to the next thing. We don't wait. We're not waiting 10 years to get to where we know that we can be now. We go out and get it.
Yeah, there's an impatience.
Right. There is that.
Mm-hmm.
And so it can be a pro and it can be a con depending on the person.
Right.
And another way, bringing it back to city government, this is the prime time to get people engaged. You're in it. This is going to be the influx of engagement no matter what side you're on. And so the question is not whether our generation wants to be engaged. It's how do I tell them that your local government matters? Everybody sees what's going on federal. Everybody sees DC, right? I just gave a talk over the weekend and somebody's like, I want to be in DC. I don't want to go to college in Florida. Florida is a game changer state. If you really want to, work on some campaigns that can flip the switch, you need to be in Florida, not DC. So if you really want to understand how the federal government is ran, how your state government is ran, how your local government is ran, one, the history books are not enough. We have to go out and really engage people, say, hey, see what we do. Understand how you influence your local government. Because you can even tell with the voting booths and the population of it. Total overall engagement in the city of Rockville. I think cities all across the U.S. has lacked that initiative for people to understand how their local government matters. But as you can see, there's a rise that's starting on both sides. You just have to engage it. It is there. You just got to do it.
Got to harness it. Did you want to say something?
Yeah, I mean, I'll also say, just speaking as chairman of the Rockville Chamber, private sector businesses are looking to hire and attract millennials too. And one thing that I got from one of these slides is that the jobs follow the people. Is that right? Not the other way around. So one thing we need to try to do is get millennials here. And I find it, it's a fascinating and complex discussion juxtaposed with the APFO and school overcrowding and development conversation that we had before this. And it's a big challenge that I think, I don't envy you guys having to take that on at all. But at the same time, there has to be, the availability of places for these millennials to live in the type of places that they want to live, which is they want to be able to live, work, and play in the same 15 minutes. So, just kind of throwing that out there. I know that might not be the most popular of opinions, but everything is intertwined, and they're not mutually exclusive discussions. So I know that now that I am married with a kid, live in Woodley Gardens, which is a phenomenal place to live if you're married with a kid. We can walk to parks, and we have a little shopping center there. But when I was 25, you weren't going to catch me living in Woodley Gardens. I was living in a place where I could walk to 50 restaurants, in Bethesda, and 12 grocery stores and 12 Starbucks and all that stuff, all within that one area. And so that's what people who are, the millennials that are younger than me, that's what they're looking for. And that's what I was looking for when I was 25.
Councilmember.
So that is exactly the point, and with my millennial son, that's exactly the same profile. Lived in Bethesda, then got married, and now lives in, I hate to say it, Gaithersburg, but it's another issue. That's a family issue. But the point is, so I guess I asked Matt, some of that is aging. I hate to say it, you are aging too, just as hopefully we are aging.
By the second.
Right, and we applaud that. So, and I don't say maturity, that's not at all what I'm saying, but it's the aging, the childbearing years. If one chooses to go that route, there are some biological imperatives here, although people are stretching that too. So when I think about Rockville and I think about our residential neighborhoods, just as Cliff, if I may call you that,
Sure.
You moved into a residential community when you had other needs and other priorities.
Yep.
And that's what I wonder when I look, Matt, is that still going to be there? The live, work, play, the 15-minute radius, how do you mesh all that together?
Well, I don't know how Rockville is set up, but how it's going to impact communities across the country is through zoning. We're not going to look for, let's go drive to qualify, put us out in the sticks for the residential for starter homes, and then have to drive an hour to come to work. Is not very attractive to this generation. They'd rather see, how do we have affordable housing or starter homes for newly married that's in the community? And I think the biggest pressure that's going to happen to councils like yours all across the country is the pressure of, we have for, 100 years, and as we've been developing America, it's all about land use and maximizing the dollar of that land use. And we have to start thinking about what are we doing to maximize the land for our community, not just for our pocketbooks, for developers' pocketbooks, for our tax coffers. There's got to be more to it than that. And back to what you had asked me earlier, Mark, about the population pyramid, we're going to have 50% more people over 65 by 2030, and only a third of them have enough money to live beyond 65. So where are they going to live? Who's going to take care of them? So the pressure on communities and how they do land use, it's going to be transformed over the next 10 years by pressure from this generation and pressure from the older generation.
Well, I think there's another thing to bring it back to the placemaking, because that jumped out at me. You had Annapolis up there. The mayor of Annapolis told me last week that they're changing down by the dock, I mean, not by the docks, but by the water where the boats turn around, moving some of the parking out and making it a place for people to spend time.
Right.
It's a bocce court and some things like that are coming because they want that placemaking, and I think that's an opportunity for the city of Rockville to not just figure out who we want to be, as Mary said, but how do we make it that way so that we've got all generations who still want to and can live here because of the other things that we're doing. And that, I think, is the question, that we have to wrestle with as a body to go forward. And whether it's putting together a millennial task force or, coming up with a group that comes up with a new vision and branding campaign that's more attractive to people. I mean, I think that's what we have to do as a city is figure it out. Because when you look at City of Rockville, get into it, it doesn't tell you a thing about who we are. And yet you see it everywhere, So that is part of moving us into a place where people want to come and be here, not just those of us that are already here.
Right.
We already drank the Kool-Aid.
And it's E, check the box, all of the above.
All of the above, right, exactly.
All
so.
of you.
Yeah, I have a question.
Yes, Councilmember.
I have a question. And first I want to make a comment to Mr. Thornhill. You were talking about First Watch. That is one of the original businesses in Rockville Town Center that has survived. We've had a lot of turnover, but First Watch was there from the beginning, so it's good that they're...
Good eatings.
Yes, it is, yes, and they're always busy. You better get there early if you want service, otherwise you're in line. But I want to ask Mary and Cliff, both of you are Rockville residents, and you're millennials, but you live two different lifestyles. But I'd like to know, as you look at Rockville, and if you don't want to answer tonight, I want you to put some thought into it. What's the one thing that you see in this city that you say, oh, if Rockville would just, it would be a better place for millennials?
We need some more craft beer, I think.
Okay.
I'll throw a plug in for True Respite, which is just outside city limits of Rockville. We need to get them to come inside the city and get more of that. And I think that will help as far as getting the placemaking going.
Okay.
That's a good idea.
He's not wrong.
That's a question I have to think about. I honestly don't know. It was funny because Matt asked me earlier what made me move to Rockville. And I said, there was a place in Silver Springs that I was looking at, looked very crowded, saw people my age, and then there was Gables Upper Rock that looked exactly like that one. And I was thinking, oh, there must be, a lot of people that's around my age there. There has to be like coffee shop, wine, everything, that's there. Now, that was moving up here from Florida and sight unseen. So when I got up here, I was like, well, I mean, it's close enough. Like, I had the Metro, which I never used the Metro before in my life. And sad to say, I'm a frequent visitor in Crown. That is my go-to spot, or either Pike and Rose. So I'm not sure, there's a big gap. I'm sure you know what that gap in the center is, but to be perfectly honest, I'm not sure what that thing is for Rockville. I know for me, I go to Starbucks on a very regular basis, almost addictive basis, and I love Barnes & Noble, and I love great restaurants, and that's probably some of the stuff that I'm probably looking for, and I just keep going out to different areas and getting it.
Okay, that does answer the question, because you say you go to Crown, and I find that a lot of people, they'll live here in Rockville, but for recreation, they'll go to Crown, or Rio, so it's, yeah, or further down in Bethesda, or Pike and Rose, okay.
Well, stick
So
around. I'm sorry, I apologize.
It's okay. No, I was just gonna say, so we need to get that mix that keeps people, especially millennials, here, so that you don't get in your car and go to Crown or Rio or...
Well, you have to decide first if that's what you want to be.
Right.
What I was
Right.
going to say was stick around for the next discussion because it's on the Stone Street Master Plan. And there've been a lot of comments and conversations about Stone Street and will it be the Arts and Culture District and bring in some of the things or, you know, the food, what's it called? Culinary Row or something. You know, those are the things that I think you both are expressing, places to go, the placemaking, so. Thank you so much, Matt,
My
Mary,
pleasure.
and Cliff.
Thank you.
Awesome job. Thank you, thank you.
Thank you.
Councilmember Feinberg.
So I know the hour is getting late, but I'd like to ask that we have sort of a follow-up conversation amongst ourselves of next steps,
Yeah.
if we can have that. I don't want to delay it now, and there's a lot of good kernels of conversation that came from this, but I think we need to go to a next step and have a conversation if my colleagues agree, so that a bring back, not now. No,
Yeah.
not now, Mary Lou.
Yeah.
No, I said given the late hour.
I completely agree, and
Thank
let's
you.
do under future agendas, and
So I'm just bringing
Let's
that
put
up. I
that up.
think that we need a follow-up.
I would agree. Super, thank you.